Chapter 1. The day was ending in a long, slow sigh of colour. From the threshold of the Lyceum, where the cool stone still held the memory of the afternoon's heat, Lyra watched the light bleed out of the sky. It was a painter's light, thick and golden, draping itself over the marble of the colonnades, turning the columns from stark white to the colour of old honey. The air itself seemed gilded, filled with a haze of dust motes dancing in the final slanted rays of the sun, each one a tiny fleeting star. She lingered there, a ghost at the feast of ideas. Further along the portico, the voices of her peers rose and fell in a warm and easy cadence, a tapestry of argument and laughter. She saw Damon, his head thrown back in mirth, the sound a bright, confident thread in the weave. He moved with an unthinking grace, his body as comfortable in the world as his mind was among the theorems of Euclid or the dialogues of Plato. Lyra envied him that ease, that sense of belonging. For her, learning felt like a garment she had not yet grown into, its seams too tight across her shoulders, its fabric a constant, chafing reminder of her own inadequacy. She worried she was merely collecting the words of others, arranging them like polished stones in her mind, without ever feeling their true weight or discovering a single one of her own. The low hum of Athens in its evening ritual settled around her, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the murmur of voices. From the agora, the tireless, rasping song of the cicadas that pulsed from the olive groves like the city's own dreaming heart. From the gardens that bordered the Lyceum, a breath of citrus and laurel drifted toward her, mingling with the chalky scent of the paths and the deeper, earthier fragrance of wild thyme crushed underfoot. She felt a pull toward it, a yearning for the simplicity of the ground beneath her feet, for a silence that did not demand to be filled with cleverness. It was then she saw him. Irenaeus stood near the mouth of a gravel path leading into the gardens, his form a gentle question mark against the deepening twilight. He was not looking at her, but rather at the way the shadows of the olive leaves trembled upon the stone. His back was stooped, not with the fragility of age, but with the posture of one long accustomed to bending close to the earth to observe its smallest miracles. His hands were clasped behind him, the knuckles gnarled like the roots of the very trees he contemplated. He had been her teacher for 2 seasons, yet he had offered her fewer answers than any other. Instead, he offered stillness. He offered presence. As if feeling her gaze, he turned. His eyes, set deep within a fine web of wrinkles, held a quiet warmth that seemed to gather the fading light and hold it fast. He did not call her name, but a slow smile creased the corners of his mouth, an invitation more potent than any word. It was permission. Lyra's breath, which she hadn't realized she was holding, escaped her in a quiet rush. She pushed away from the column, her sandals whispering against the smooth marble, and walked toward him. The sounds of Damon and the others receded, becoming a gentle, indistinct murmur, the background music to this new, more fragile melody. "The day is a fine one for walking," he said, his voice soft as worn leather. She nodded, finding her own voice still caught in her throat, a knot of worry and striving. They set off together, their steps falling into a slow, unhurried rhythm on the pebbled path. Dust, the color of saffron, rose in small puffs around their feet. Lyra was acutely aware of the space between them, a small river of air filled with unspoken things. Her mind was still churning, replaying a morning debate on the nature of virtue, the arguments slipping through her grasp like water. She felt a frantic need to say something wise, to prove that her time here was not wasted. But Irenaeus remained silent. He simply walked, his gaze drifting, settling. He seemed to drink in the evening with his eyes. He watched a small emerald lizard dart across a sun-warmed wall, its movement a flicker of vibrant life. He inhaled deeply as they passed a screen of jasmine, its scent growing thick and heady as the coolness of night began to rise from the soil. His silence was not an absence. It was a vessel, and slowly Lyra felt her own anxieties begin to pour into it, leaving her blessedly, frighteningly empty. The insistent churn of her thoughts began to quiet, replaced by the crunch of the gravel, the persistent song of the cicadas, the feel of the cooling air on her forearms. They came to a stop beside an ancient olive tree, its trunk a magnificent sculpture of hardship and endurance. It was twisted, almost agonized in its form, its bark a grey, fissured map of slow years and long droughts. Irenaeus reached out and laid his palm flat against the rough surface, as if greeting an old friend. He stood that way for a long moment, his eyes closed. Then, without turning to her, he asked, his voice a low hum, "What do you think troubles the heart of this old tree?" The question disarmed her completely. She had been expecting a query about metaphysics, about the forms, about the soul. Her mind, trained for abstraction, faltered. A tree did not have a heart. A tree could not be troubled. These were the simple, logical facts. Yet, the way he asked it, the genuine curiosity in his tone, invited not an answer, but a contemplation. She stepped closer, tentatively placing her own hand beside his on the trunk. The bark was coarse and deeply grooved, yet held a surprising warmth, the last dregs of the day's sun held captive in its flesh. She felt the history in it, the slow cellular memory of 1,000 seasons. She looked up at its limbs, silver-green leaves trembling against a sky that was now the color of a deep bruise, amethyst and indigo. She thought of the fierce summer winds that tore at its branches, the relentless sun that baked the earth at its feet, the weight of the olives it produced year after year without fail. "Perhaps," she began, her voice barely a whisper, afraid of sounding foolish, "perhaps it is tired of standing so still, of holding the sky up on its own." She paused, the thought unfurling like a fern. Or perhaps it remembers every storm it has ever weathered, and its heart is just heavy with the memory of lightning. Irenaeus turned his head to her, a soft light in his eyes. He did not praise or correct her. He simply nodded, accepting her words as if they were a gift of fruit from the tree itself. "A heavy thing, memory," he murmured, and they stood in the shared knowledge of that truth, their hands resting on the living wood. They continued their walk. The world had narrowed now, its edges softened by the dusk. The distant Parthenon, perched atop its sacred rock, was no longer a monument to human grandeur, but a silhouette, a dark shape dreaming against the first stars. In the distance, Lyra saw the bent shape of the old gardener, moving slowly among his rose bushes, the scent of fresh-turned earth and blooming petals reaching them on the breeze. He was humming, a low, familiar tune that seemed to be part of the garden's own breath. They paused again beside a low, sprawling bush of wild thyme. Irenaeus stooped, his old joints cracking softly, and brushed his fingers across the tiny leaves, releasing a sharp, clean perfume that cut through the honeyed air. "Do you suppose they dream?" he wondered aloud, his gaze lost in the intricate tangle of stems. These small ones, so close to the earth. If they dream, what do you think they dream of? This time, Lyra did not hesitate. The first question had unlocked something in her, a door to a room she had forgotten existed. The part of her that was not a student, not a striver, but a child who had once believed the wind had a voice and the stones had secrets. She knelt beside him, the fine dust of the path powdering her knees. The dusk was cool on her skin. She looked at the time, at its quiet, persistent life. "I think," she said, her voice finding a surer footing, "they dream of rain, not a storm, but a soft, steady rain that washes the dust from their leaves. And they dream of bees. They dream of being useful, of being fragrant, of being crushed under a heel and leaving behind a beautiful scent as their only legacy." Irenaeus smiled, a genuine, deep smile that reached his eyes. A beautiful legacy indeed. They rose together and walked the final stretch of the path to a simple stone bench, set in a small clearing that overlooked the slope of the hill. The marble was smooth, worn by generations of thinkers and poets and lovers who had come here seeking quiet. It was cool to the touch. They sat in silence. The moon, a pale, slender sickle, was climbing the sky, casting a gentle, silvered light that made the world seem new and clean. The Parthenon was now bathed in this cool luminescence, its stones seeming to glow from within. There was no lesson to recite, no argument to win, no answer to defend. There was only the shared stillness, the vast, patient sky, and the gentle rhythm of two people breathing in the fragrant night. The frantic energy that had plagued Lyra all day had finally stilled. The cloud of disquiet had dissolved, not through force of will or intellectual breakthrough, but by simply being set down. She realized, with a clarity that was both startling and profoundly peaceful, that the questions Irenaeus asked were not tests. They were caresses. They were invitations to look, to feel, to wonder without the burden of finding a definitive truth. They were a way of touching the world with your mind, gently. A warmth bloomed in her chest, a soft, quiet flowering of contentment. It was the feeling of coming home to a part of herself she had long neglected. As if sensing the shift in her, Irenaeus shifted slightly and rested his warm, dry hand over hers where it lay on the cold stone between them. It was a simple, grounding touch, a gesture of communion that said everything and nothing at all. They sat that way for a long time, two quiet figures on a stone bench, watching the moon rise, their hands joined in a silent reverence for the simple, unending wonder of the world. The night deepened, cool and patient, over the timeless stones, and for the first time in a long time, Lyra felt her own heart beating in time with its slow, eternal pulse. Chapter 2. The sun, a great white disk all day, had begun its slow surrender, melting into the hazy attic sky. It bled a pale, liquid gold over the city, a wash of light that softened the sharp edges of marble and cypress. Here, outside the Lyceum's quiet portico, the air had already begun to cool, carrying on its breath the scent of time crushed underfoot and the faint, dusty perfume of old scrolls. The city's hum, a distant chorus of market cries, clattering hooves and echoing laughter from the agora, was a tide receding, leaving behind a shore of gathering stillness. Lyra stood beside the fluted columns, her sandals silent on the worn flagstones. A restlessness stirred within her, a familiar ache of questions that had no shape, no words to give them voice. They were like birds trapped in the hollow of her ribs, fluttering against bone. She shifted her weight, the leather of her sandals whispering against the stone, a sound so small it was almost lost in the great sighing hush of dusk. Her teacher, Callimachus, emerged from the shadows of the colonnade, his presence as gentle as the evening itself. He did not startle her, he simply appeared, as if he had been a part of the twilight all along. His chiton, the color of undyed wool, seemed to hold the last of the day's warmth. He nodded, a slow inclination of his head, his eyes crinkling at the corners with a kindness that asked for nothing. Without a word, he turned, and Lyra fell into step beside him. They began their walk, a meandering path that led them from the grand geometry of the portico into the ancient living architecture of an olive grove. Here the world changed. The straight lines of human craft gave way to the gnarled, expressive limbs of the trees. Their branches, twisted by centuries of wind and sun, reached overhead like the arms of sleeping giants, their leaves a shivering canopy of silver and grey-green. The light, filtering through this filigree, dappled the ground in shifting patterns, painting the earth in soft, impressionistic strokes. They walked in a companionable silence, a quiet so profound it felt like a form of speech. The only sounds were the soft crush of dry earth under their feet and the gentle rhythm of their breathing, two small currents in the vast, peaceful ocean of the grove. The unhurried cadence of their footfalls seemed to echo the slow, patient pulse of the trees around them. It was Callimachus who finally stirred the quiet, his voice not breaking the peace but becoming a part of it. It was light, touched with a genuine, almost childlike wonder, as if he were posing a question to the air itself, not demanding an answer, but simply giving curiosity a sound. "Why do you suppose?" he murmured, his gaze drifting toward the dense foliage where the day's heat still lingered. The cicadas sing so heartily as the sun departs. It is not a lament, it sounds like a celebration of the coming dark. Lyra did not answer immediately. The question settled in her mind, not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a seed. She let it rest there, turning it over and over. She listened, truly listened, to the sound he spoke of, that high, electric, trembling thrum that was the very heartbeat of a Greek summer evening. It was not a sad sound. It was insistent, vital, a fierce hymn to the brief, beautiful finality of a day. They continued their slow promenade, their path winding deeper into the grove. Callimachus paused, laying a gentle hand on the trunk of a particularly ancient olive tree. Its bark was a landscape of its own, a topography of deep fissures and smooth, silvery plateaus worn by time and touch. "And this one," he mused, his voice barely a whisper. "What do you imagine the olive tree dreams about? Rooted so long in this one place, it has felt more seasons than we can count. It has known the shade of men whose names are now only stories." Lyra reached out, her own fingers tracing the rough, intricate relief of the bark. It felt cool and alive under her touch, a repository of silent wisdom. She thought of the roots, plunged deep into the unseen earth, drawing strength from darkness. She thought of the leaves, drinking in the light. This tree knew only this small patch of ground, yet it knew the sun and the moon, the rain and the wind, the passing of generations. Its stillness was not an absence of life, but a different kind of living. A slow, deep, patient existence that watched the frantic scuttling of shorter lives with a vast, unjudging calm. Her own thoughts, so often a turbulent current, began to clear. They took on the colors of the evening, the soft, dusty rose of the horizon, the deep, resonant green of the leaves. Her longing, that restless fluttering in her chest, was not for answers, but for this quality of stillness, for the slow, unhurried wisdom she could feel humming in the wood beneath her fingertips. The cicadas' song, she considered, was perhaps the bridge. It was the sound that belonged to both the fading light and the rising dark, a thread of music woven between two worlds, making the transition not an ending but a continuation. A breeze, soft as a sigh, drifted up from the lower slopes, carrying with it the sweet, heady perfume of wild honeysuckle and the fainter, spicier scent of sun-baked rock rose. Lyra saw a cluster of anemones, their petals closing for the night, their deep violet color absorbing the last of the light. A few honeybees, heavy with the day's work, drowsed among them, their movements languid and slow. Further along the path, a marble statue of a nymph, half hidden by overgrown ivy, seemed to glow from within, its surface holding the last warmth of the sun like a cherished memory. The cool stone, she imagined, would feel like sun-warmed skin. The music of the cicadas rose and fell, a vibrant, shimmering veil of sound drawn over the landscape. It blended with the muted laughter that drifted up from the city, with the distant bleating of a goat, with the rustle of a lizard in the dry leaves. It was all one composition, one great unfolding piece of music. Lyra rubbed her thumb and forefinger together, noticing for the first time a fine, pale dust clinging to her skin, pollen from an olive blossom she must have brushed against. It was soft, ephemeral, a reminder of the fleeting, delicate beauty of it all. The softness of the pollen, the coolness of the coming night, the rough texture of the ancient bark, it all felt part of the same quiet truth. She finally gave voice to some small fragment of her thoughts, her words tentative, offered up to the gentle air between them. "Perhaps the song is not for the sun or the dark," she said softly, her gaze on the trembling leaves overhead. "Perhaps it is for the time in between, the way a story is not for the beginning or the end, but for the telling." Callimachus listened, his head tilted slightly, a soft smile touching his lips. He did not praise her answer or correct it. He did not analyze it or build upon it. He simply received it, as the earth receives rain, allowing it to sink in without comment. His silence was an invitation, a space for her to explore her own thoughts more deeply, to trust their shape and texture without needing them to be validated or refined. Their conversation drifted that way, a slow and easy current, moving between her quiet musings and his peaceful stillness, as natural and unforced as the shifting light in the grove. As the last sliver of gold vanished from the sky, leaving behind a wash of deep indigo, they found a worn marble bench set at the edge of the grove. It overlooked the city, which was now settling into a deeper blue, its sharp outlines blurring into a soft, muted whole. Here and there, the first lamps flickered to life, small orange sparks in the vast, deepening twilight. They sat together, the chill of the ancient stone seeping slowly through their clothes, a pleasant, grounding coolness. Above them, the heavens opened. The first stars appeared, not bursting into view but trembling into existence, shy points of silver in the velvety dark. The moon, a pale, luminous sliver, cast a gentle, ethereal light, and across the valley the Parthenon rose on its high rock, no longer a sun-bleached monument of the day, but a veiled, mysterious silhouette against the night. It seemed less a building of stone and more a structure of solidified moonlight and shadow. Lyra let out a slow, quiet breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The flock of questions in her chest had settled. Their frantic fluttering had ceased, and they were now resting, their wings folded in the quiet dark of her mind. Here, wrapped in the cool embrace of the night and the gentle, inquiring companionship of her teacher, there was no need for answers. She rested her hand on the bench beside her, her fingers tracing the cold, smooth patterns etched into the stone by time and weather. They felt like a script written in a language she could not read but could, in this moment, understand. The mysteries of the cicadas' song and the olive tree's dream lingered, but they were no longer riddles demanding to be solved. They had become something else entirely. Invitations to be still, to listen to the world's quiet hum, to see the beauty in the space between day and night, to sit and to breathe and to gently, peacefully wonder. Chapter 3 #Enfree Chapter 3 The twilight walk among olive leaves and day ended, not with a sudden closing, but with a slow exhalation of light. From the cool, shadowed portico of the Lyceum, where the stone still held the memory of the afternoon's relentless sun, the world outside seemed painted in hues of apricot and deepening violet. The heat was beginning to release its grip on the city, and the air, which had shimmered and wavered for hours, now grew still, heavy with the coming night. Lyra felt the change on her skin, a subtle coolness that was less a chill and more a gentle sigh from the earth itself. Beside her, Callias stood for a moment, his hand resting on the fluted column at the edge of the colonnade. His silence was not empty, but full, a vessel holding the day's accumulated thoughts. He was a man carved from the same patient stone as the statues that lined the gardens, his movements deliberate, his presence a quiet anchor in the restless currents of the school. When he finally moved, stepping from the smooth, polished floor onto the weather-worn path, the transition was seamless, as if he were merely moving from one room of his home to another. Lyra followed, her own steps less certain. The path was studded with pebbles, worn smooth by centuries of sandals and seeking feet, and they made a soft, grinding sound beneath her own. A restlessness thrummed within her, a strange and unnamed yearning that always seemed to rise with the dusk. It was a hunger for something she could not name, a question that had not yet found its words, kindled by the slant of the fading light and the way it made ordinary things seem suddenly profound. They walked into the heart of the olive grove, and the world transformed. The scent was the first thing to claim her senses, a thick, resinous perfume from the gnarled trees, mingled with the dry dust of the path and the faint, sweet smell of fallen petals turning back to earth. The low, incessant drone of cicadas pulsed in the warm air, not as a distinct sound, but as the very vibration of the evening itself, a thrumming you felt in your bones. Callias moved with a slow, careful gait that was both a concession to his age and a quiet lesson in purpose. He did not hurry toward a destination, but inhabited the journey itself. His measured calm was a balm to the disquiet in Lyra's soul, a steadying hand on her own racing thoughts. She watched the way his linen chiton brushed against the low-hanging branches, the fabric catching the last of the sun's fire. The olive trees were ancient things, their trunks twisted into agonized, beautiful shapes, like old men hunched in thought. Their bark was a geography of time, scarred with fissures and knots, and their leaves, a muted green on their faces, shimmered with a startling spectral silver on their undersides as a slight breeze turned them toward the sky. They were not merely trees, they were witnesses. In stone alcoves, set deep into the garden walls, beeswax candles had been lit. They burned with a soft, unwavering light, sending golden halos into the gathering shadows. The flames made the darkness seem deeper, richer, a velvet cloak embroidered with small, warm suns. Lyra imagined the quiet presence of other scholars, other pairs of masters and students, wandering these same paths just beyond the veil of sight. Their hushed conversations, their silent ponderings seemed to linger in the air like a fragrance, ghosts of thought left behind in the garden. They walked for some time without speaking, letting the sounds of the evening settle around them. The silence between them was comfortable, a shared space rather than an absence. It was Callias who finally broke it, his voice as soft as the dust on the path. "Lyra," he began, his gaze fixed on a branch just above her head, "have you noticed how the olive leaves turn their softer faces to catch the last light?" She looked up, truly seeing them for the first time. He was right. The silvery undersides were angled toward the western sky, 1,000 tiny mirrors reflecting the dying embers of the day. They seemed to glow from within, alive and sentient in the twilight. "I see it," she whispered, her voice feeling fragile in the vast quiet. "What do you think they yearn for?" he asked. The question was not a test. It was an offering, a small, smooth stone placed in her open palm. He did not look at her, giving her the space to let her thoughts unfold without the pressure of his gaze. Lyra considered it. The easy answer was that they sought the sun, the source of their life. But the word he had used was, "I yearn." It suggested a deeper, more personal longing. She watched the leaves tremble, their silver flickering. "Perhaps," she began, her own voice surprising her with its steadiness, "perhaps they are not yearning for the light that is leaving, but for the memory of the light it gave. They hold on to its last touch, not to keep it, but to remember it through the darkness. A promise of its return." Callias nodded slowly, a faint smile touching the corners of his mouth. He did not say if she was right or wrong. The question had been the point, not the answer. He resumed his slow walk, and she fell into step beside him, the unnamed restlessness in her chest beginning to soften, to dissolve into a gentle curiosity. A few paces later, he paused again, his attention drawn to a spot on the rough bark of a particularly ancient tree. Lyra followed his gaze and saw them, a pair of cicadas, their translucent wings folded against their dark, jewel-like bodies. They clung to the bark, their song a continuous, high-pitched thrum that seemed to make the very wood beneath them vibrate. The sound was so much a part of the evening that she had ceased to hear it, but now, focusing on its source, it became immense, the anthem of the twilight. They are loud for such small beings, Callias mused, his voice barely a whisper. He leaned in slightly, as if listening to a secret. Why do you suppose they sing as evening falls, when the world grows quieter? This time, Lyra felt a flicker of confidence. His patience was a gift, emboldening her to think not for him, but for herself. She watched the cicadas, their bodies taut with the effort of their song. Because it is the only time they can be truly heard, she said, the thought forming as she spoke it. During the day, their music is lost in the noise of the city, the workshops, the agora. But now the world holds its breath. Their song doesn't have to fight to be heard. It can simply be. Maybe it is not a song of sorrow for the end of the day, but a song of celebration, for the quiet that allows them to exist fully. She paused, then added, or perhaps they are singing the sun to sleep. Callias turned to her then, his eyes set deep within a fine web of lines, holding a gentle, appreciative light. To sing the sun to sleep, he repeated softly. I like that very much. He did not add anything more, but a new kind of connection had been forged between them, a fragile bridge built of shared wonder. They began to walk again, and now Lyra was more aware, more present. Their journey was not merely a walk, it was an act of listening. Hand in hand with the profound silence, they allowed the garden's subtle music to find them. They heard the dry, deliberate rustle of a tortoise making its slow way through the undergrowth, a sound like old parchment being crumpled. From the direction of the Lyceum's kitchens, there came the distant, clear chime of a clay amphora being set down gently against a stone ledge. And beneath it all, the whisper of their own leather sandals on the gravel, a soft, rhythmic shush, shush. That was the sound of their own shared time passing. The sky had deepened to an indigo velvet, and the first stars were beginning to prick through the fabric of the night. The amber glow of sunset had vanished, replaced by the cool, ethereal wash of a rising moon. Its light was different, a clean silver luminescence that did not burn but merely illuminated. It touched the marble statues and made them seem to breathe. It spilled over the leaves and turned their silver into quicksilver. Ahead, nestled in a clearing where the trees parted, was a single marble bench. It was long and low to the ground, its surface worn smooth and concave by the countless thinkers, poets and dreamers who had sought solace there before them. It seemed to glow in the moonlight, an invitation to rest. Callias led her to it, and they sat, shoulder to shoulder. The stone was cool against Lyra's legs, a pleasant contrast to the lingering warmth in the air. For a long while they simply sat, enveloped in a stillness that felt as ancient as the olive grove itself. The drone of the cicadas had softened, and the air was now filled with the rich, loamy scent of the Athenian earth, damp with evening dew. From their vantage point, through a carefully framed gap in the twisting olive branches, the Acropolis was visible on its high rock. Bathed in the stark silver of the full moon, the Parthenon stood like a bone-white crown against the ink-black sky. It seemed less a building of stone and more an idea given form, a testament to something enduring and perfect, floating above the sleeping city. The familiar sight, one she had seen every day of her life, was made new again, framed by the dark, living filigree of the branches. Lyra gazed up at it, her heart full. The restlessness that had plagued her at the start of their walk had vanished completely. It had been replaced by a deep, resonant calm, a feeling of being perfectly placed in the world. The gentle questions, the shared silence, the simple act of looking and listening had gentled her spirit. She understood, in that moment, that the purpose of their walk had not been to find answers, but to learn how to live more deeply within the questions. To wonder aloud about the yearning of a leaf, to listen to the song of an insect, was not an escape from the world, but a deeper engagement with it. She felt the solid weight of the marble bench beneath her, the rich earth of Athens under her feet, and the endless star-dusted sky above. And in the quiet company of her teacher, surrounded by ancient roots and eternal light, her own small soul felt for a moment just as vast. Chapter 4. The light did not so much fall as it thickened, the clear attic air growing heavy and golden, as if the sun, in its slow descent, were melting into honey. Dusk settled over the Lyceum's gardens, not as a blanket of shadow, but as a slow, warm infusion of color. The pale stone of the colonnades stained ochre, the deep greens of the cypress trees softened to a dusky amethyst. A profound warmth, the day's accumulated breath, breathed up from the flagstones, carrying with it the ghost of figs from a distant orchard and the clean, resinous sigh of olive leaves. The world seemed to slow, to hold its exhalation. Lyra walked a pace behind her teacher, the hem of her simple chiton whispering against the polished stones of the peripatos. The path, worn smooth by the sandals of a generation of thinkers, wound its way from the lecture halls toward the deeper quiet of the groves. Within her, a constellation of questions burned with a cool, persistent light. They were not the sharp academic inquiries of the morning's discourse on ethics, but something softer, more nebulous, a tangle of threads she could not yet begin to weave into a coherent tapestry. An ache of not knowing that was more feeling than thought. Her teacher, a figure she had come to see as a landmark in the landscape of her own mind, moved with a slow, deliberate grace. His himation, the color of old linen and softened by countless washings, draped his frame in folds that seemed to have learned the shape of his pensive posture. The steady, rhythmic scrape of his sandals on the path was a gentle percussion, a grounding beat in the day's fading symphony. He did not speak, and Lyra was grateful for the silence. It was not an empty void between them, but a vessel holding the day's learning, the evening's beauty, and the unspoken weight of her own burgeoning soul. They passed beneath the silver-grey trunks of the olive trees, their limbs gnarled into gestures of prayer or patience, their leaves a shimmering canopy that fractured the last of the sun's rays into 1,000 moving pieces of light. The air here was different, ancient and still. It smelled of dry earth and the deep, persistent life of the wood. The teacher stopped, his long-fingered hand coming to rest on the rough, fissured bark of the oldest tree, a patriarch of the grove. The gesture was one of familiarity, of greeting an old friend. He stood for a long moment, his head tilted as if in listening, before turning his gaze, soft and inquisitive, to Lyra. "Listen," he murmured, his voice a low burr that seemed to blend with the hum of the evening. "Why do the cicadas greet the closing day with such a fervent song?" Lyra stilled, her own senses opening to the world he had indicated. The sound was everywhere, a high, electric thrum that rose and fell in waves. It was not a sound she had consciously noticed, Until now, it had been mere texture, the sonic wallpaper of a summer evening. But the question invited her to truly hear it, to feel its resonance in the warm air. She felt the vibration in her teeth, in the fine hairs on her arms. It was a sound born of heat, a direct translation of the day's oppressive, brilliant sun into pure energy, a final ecstatic release before the cool of the night. "Perhaps," she began, her own voice softer than she intended, a quiet counterpoint to the insect's chorus, "it is not a greeting to the evening, but a farewell to the sun, a hymn to the heat that gave them life." She considered her own words. Or maybe it is a kind of memory. They are singing the memory of the light, trying to hold it in the air a little longer before it is gone. The teacher smiled, a faint crinkling at the corners of his eyes. He did not confirm or deny her thought, merely let it hang in the air between them, a possibility. As if in response, the cicadas' chorus swelled, a great unified wave of sound that seemed to make the very leaves tremble. It was, as she had felt, a living heartbeat, the pulse of the garden itself. They walked on, the path curving toward the low borders of the herb garden. Here, a new current entered the air, fragrant and complex. The pine-sharp cleanliness of rosemary brushed against the deeper, earthy warmth of thyme, its tiny leaves crushed underfoot by some careless student earlier in the day, releasing a scent that spoke of rocky hillsides and hot sun. The teacher paused again, his focus drawn not to a grand tree but to the humble, tenacious herbs lining their path. His eyes, clear and imbued with a gentle curiosity that age had not dimmed but refined, twinkled. "And what of the olive tree we just left?" he asked, his voice still quiet, inviting contemplation rather than demanding an answer. "What might it dream of when the night wind rustles its leaves and the moon is its only companion?" There was no hurry for her to speak. The question was a seed planted in the soil of the moment. Lyra let her fingers trail over the feathery tips of a rosemary branch, the oils clinging to her skin, a faint, clean perfume. She looked back toward the ancient olive, now a silhouette against the deepening twilight. What would a thing that measured its life in centuries, not days, dream of? She thought of its roots, the unseen, intricate network gripping the earth, drinking in darkness and water, a slow, patient conversation with the deep. She thought of the sun, a procession of millions of sunrises, each one felt as a subtle warmth on its bark, a summons to its leaves. It would not dream in images, not in the fleeting narratives of a human mind. Its dreams would be of slowness, of the imperceptible shift of seasons, the memory of 100 droughts, the slow, patient accumulation of rings, of sorrows and suns. "I think," she said, her gaze distant, fixed on the old tree, "it dreams of the earth, of the cool, silent dark beneath the ground, and it dreams of its own endurance, not as a story, but as a feeling, a memory held not in a mind, but in the grain of the wood itself, of all the moons that have silvered its leaves, and all the storms it has weathered without breaking." She let her hand fall to her side. "Its dreams are of its own deep, slow life." The path bent once more, and the low, constant liquid murmur they had been approaching grew clearer. It led them to a small fountain, a single, elegant basin of Parian marble, worn smooth by a century of hands and rain. A thin stream of water trickled from a simple bronze spout into the pool, its surface a perfect dark mirror reflecting the last blush-pink clouds in the indigo sky. The sound was a tonic, a cool note in the warm evening air, blending with the cicadas and the first tentative chirps of the night creatures. They stood by its edge, the water's gentle cadence seeming to measure time differently, each droplet a moment, each ripple an eternity. The teacher dipped his fingers into the cool water, then looked at Lyra, his expression open, his final question the most direct, yet the most profound. In all this harmony, Lyra, the song of the insects, the scent of the herbs, the patience of the trees, the constancy of this water, where do you find your own stillness? This question went deeper. It was not about the outer world, but the inner one. The press of unspoken things in her chest tightened for a moment, a knot of confusion. Where was her stillness? In the frantic city, in the demanding halls of the Lyceum, she felt she had none. She was a vessel for information, a whirlwind of ideas and duties. She closed her eyes, shutting out the last of the visible world to better feel it. She listened. She heard the water, the cicadas, the distant, muffled hum of Athens settling for the night. She felt the slight breeze on her skin, carrying the scent of time and damp earth. She felt the solid stone beneath her sandals, and beneath it all, she felt the quiet, steady rhythm of her own breathing, the soft, persistent beat of her own heart. It was not a roaring fire, this stillness. It was not a great, silent chamber. It was a tiny, flickering flame in a vast and sometimes windy space. It was a tentative peace, an echo. "Here," she whispered, her eyes still closed. She opened them slowly, looking not at her teacher, but at the reflection in the water, where the sky and her own shadowed face met. "It is not a place I can build for myself. It is a thing I can only hear when everything else is in its place. My own heart, it feels like an echo of the garden's quiet, not separate. For a moment it feels like it is a part of this, a single quiet note held within the grander chord." A smile of profound warmth spread across her teacher's face. He nodded slowly, a gesture of complete understanding. He had not given her answers, she realized. He had only offered questions that would lead her to her own. Side by side, they walked the final few paces to a weathered marble bench set on a small rise, overlooking the city. They sat, the cool of the stone seeping slowly through their clothes. Below them, Athens lay spilled like a mosaic of hearth-lights and shadow, the sounds of its life, a distant dog's bark, the faint clatter of a closing shutter, reaching them as a muted murmur. And then, as if the world had been waiting for them to find their seats for the performance, the moon began to rise. It crept at first a sliver of impossible luminescence above the dark ridge of the hills, and then it bloomed, climbing into the sky, full and serene. A profound hush fell over the garden, the cicadas' song finally giving way to the deeper silence of the night. The moonlight was not like the sun's. It did not reveal, it transformed. It drained the world of color and bathed it in silver and shadow, lending a new and mysterious grace to the familiar. Across the valley, the Parthenon on its high rock was no longer a structure of sun-bleached marble, but a hollowed-out vessel of light and history, its columns stark against the star-dusted velvet of the sky. Words fell away. The questions that had pressed upon Lyra's chest seemed to dissolve, not answered, but rendered unnecessary by the sheer overwhelming beauty of the moment. The tangled threads had not been woven into a tapestry, they had simply become part of a much larger one that had been there all along. A sense of belonging, vast and quiet, settled over her. It was not a belonging to a school of thought, or even to the beloved city below. It was a sense of belonging to this, to the cool stone, the ancient trees, the silent moon, the quiet presence of the man beside her. She was a part of this breathing, living tapestry, no more or less significant than a single leaf on the oldest olive tree. The evening air grew cooler, but a deep, unshakable warmth lingered within her. Together, pupil and mentor rested in a contented, companionable silence that was more articulate than any dialogue. The world, with all its complexities and relentless inquiries, was for this moment distilled to its most elemental and perfect essence. The scent of rosemary on a night breeze, the weight of moonlight on her shoulders, and the gentle, eternal cadence of the garden's song. Chapter 5. The symposium room had grown close, the air thick with the ghosts of arguments, the lingering heat of wine-warmed breath, and the scent of beeswax from lamps that had burned low. Outside, the world was beginning to breathe again. Philocrates gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a silent question that Lyra answered with the quiet grace of her rising. They slipped from the chamber, not with the hurried exit of men fleeing debate, but with the quiet accord of two souls seeking a different kind of truth, one not found in the clatter of syllogisms, but in the slow, settling dust of the day. The last of the sun's light, thick and golden as Hymettus honey, was pouring through the high colonnade, gilding the worn flagstones and casting long, distorted shadows that stretched like sleeping giants. It was a light you could almost feel, a warm weight on the shoulders, a final, generous gift from the departing day. They stepped from the structured confines of the Lyceum's main hall into this liquid gold, and the hush of twilight rushed to meet them, a soft, cool wave against the skin. Above them, the olive branches drooped, heavy with their silent, silver-green burden. A breeze, borne somewhere over the Saronic Gulf, and carrying the faint, briny memory of the sea, whispered through the leaves. It was not a sound so much as a feeling, a sibilant, all-encompassing atshush, that seemed to quiet the lingering echoes of the city in their minds. The frantic energy of Athens, the clatter of chariot wheels on stone, the cries of merchants in the agora, the endless hum of human endeavor, was already beginning to recede, replaced by the ancient rhythmic pulse of the earth itself. Their footsteps made little sound, pressing softly into the dark, warm soil of the garden path. The earth, having drunk the sun's heat all day, now exhaled it back into the cooling air, a faint, musky perfume of life and loam. They walked without hurry, their pace matched to the slow turning of the world from light to dark. It was Philocrates who finally broke the serene silence, his voice not an intrusion, but a continuation of the evening's gentle melody. "Lyra," he said, his tone a low counterpoint to the high, rising thrum of the cicadas. "Why do you think they sing so, louder as the night comes near?" It was not a test. His questions were never snares for the intellect, but rather doors opened for the spirit. He did not ask for a recitation of known facts about the mating calls of insects. He asked for wonder, Lyra did not answer at once. She let the question settle within her, much as a pebble settles at the bottom of a still pool. Her gaze drifted upwards, through the filigree of olive leaves to the sky, now a deepening canvas of violet and bruised indigo. The song of the cicadas was not a cacophony, it was a wall of sound, a shimmering, electric veil that separated the day from the night. It felt less like a collection of individual voices, and more like the sound of the evening itself finding its tongue. Perhaps, she began, her own voice soft, as if not to disturb the air. It is not a song of greeting for the night. She paused, her mind moving with the same unhurried grace as their feet. I think, perhaps, it is a lantern made of sound to guide the stars into the sky. When the sun's light is gone, something must remain to show them the way. The cicadas offer their own brightness, their own small fire, so the heavens do not feel empty or forgotten. Philocrates smiled, a slight curving of his lips visible in the gloaming. He did not praise or correct her, for there was nothing to correct. He simply accepted her thought, holding it in the space between them as they walked on. The path curved, and the world became a study in textures and scents. He stopped beside the gnarled trunk of an olive tree that must have been old when Pericles was young. Its bark was a landscape in miniature, a topography of ridges and valleys, rough and cracked like ancient pottery shards. He reached out, not to grasp it, but to lay his palm flat against its surface, a gesture of quiet reverence. "Feel this," he murmured. "Feel the memory in it." Lyra placed her own hand beside his. The bark was coarse and unyielding beneath her fingertips, yet it held a strange, deep warmth, the stored sunlight of 1,000 afternoons. She closed her eyes, trying to feel what he meant. She imagined the slow, patient drawing of water from the earth, the silent struggle of roots gripping the stone-strewn soil, the countless dawns and dusks the tree had witnessed, all of it held within this rough, living skin. She let her hand fall away, and her fingers brushed against a low-growing rosemary bush. On impulse, she plucked a small sprig and crushed it between her thumb and forefinger. A sharp, clean, resinous scent bloomed in the air, cutting through the sweeter, heavier perfumes of the garden. It was the scent of clarity, of memory, of hillsides baking in the sun. It clung to her skin, a tiny anchor in the vast sensory tapestry of the evening. The air around them was thick with other notes too, the overripe, almost wine-like sweetness of figs dropping from a nearby tree, their purple skins split to reveal a jammy crimson heart. Beneath it all was the persistent, honest musk of tilled earth and the cool, damp scent of stone. As they moved, the shadows moved with them. They were no longer the simple, stark shapes of midday, but long, quivering things, deep blue and soft-edged. Light and darkness dappled the pale marble path, painting shifting patterns on the hem of Philocrates' chiton and the tips of Lyra's sandaled feet. To walk through them was to be touched by the evening's own brush, to be momentarily dissolved and remade in washes of light and shade. It was a world rendered in thick, deliberate strokes of color and feeling, where every detail held its own quiet weight. They came upon a crack in the stone path, and there, in the fading light, a line of ants marched with relentless purpose. Each one carried a burden, a crumb of bread, a fallen seed, a fragment of a leaf, many times its own size. They paused, two human giants watching a world of infinitesimal labor unfold at their feet. There was no sound, only the silent, unwavering dedication of the column, a tiny, vital current of life flowing through the stillness of the garden. The far-off sounds of the city had ebbed into a distant, forgettable murmur, like the sea heard from a high cliff. Here, the world was this single, focused line of ants, the rustle of leaves, the thrum of the cicadas. They watched for a long time, held in a companionable silence that needed no words. The bond between them was forged in these shared moments of observation, this mutual turning away from the world of men to the world of being. "And what dreams?" Philocrates asked, his voice even softer now, almost a part of the twilight, "does the olive tree cradle within its twisted heart?" Again, Lyra waited. She did not look at the tree, but listened, as if the answer might be carried on the wind. The silence that followed his question was not empty. It was filled with the garden's own quiet answers, answers felt rather than heard. "I think," she said at last, her gaze still lost in the deepening blue, "it does not dream of the future. It dreams only of the past. It dreams of sunlight. Each ring within its trunk is a memory of a summer's warmth stored away. Each leaf holds the ghost of the light it once drank. Its dreams are a slow accumulation of warmth and wisdom, a history of every dawn that has ever broken over it. It dreams of being still and of holding the light." They reached a weathered marble bench set back beneath a swaying canopy of grapevines. The stone was cool now. The last of the day's heat finally surrendered to the night. They settled onto its smooth, worn surface, the coolness a welcome touch through the thin wool of their robes. The garden had completed its transformation. The warm golds and oranges were gone, replaced by a deep and tranquil palette of sapphire and silver. From here, through a gap in the cypress trees, they could see the Acropolis. The Parthenon, perched on its high rock, was a shadowed crown against the darkening sky. The marble did not shine, but seemed to glow with a soft internal luminescence, catching the moon's first cold touch. It looked less like a building of stone and more like a structure of condensed moonlight, a dream of order and beauty floating above the sleeping city. The stars were beginning to emerge, scattered like diamond dust on black velvet. The air was cool on Lyra's face, carrying the ceaseless, silver-threaded song of the cicadas and the thousand unanswered wonders of the world. "The true questions, Lyra," Philocrates said, his voice barely a murmur, "are not the ones we answer with our minds. They are the ones we feel in our blood and hear in the leaves. They are the ones that ask nothing of us but to be still and listen." Lyra felt a quiet, profound shift within her. It was not a sudden insight or a flash of understanding. It was a gentle opening, a slow unfurling, like the petals of a night-blooming flower. The day's anxieties, the pressure of debate, the need to know and to prove, all of it seemed to dissolve into the vast, calm expanse of the night. She was no longer just Lyra, the student, sitting beside Philocrates, the teacher. She was a small, breathing part of this garden, this night, this ancient and ever-present stillness. Her heart felt settled, at peace. On this bench, in this secluded hush, it seemed possible to dream alongside the ancient grove, to feel the slow, patient pulse of the olive tree, and to listen, without any need for an answer, to the garden's quiet, eternal questions. The world was vast and full of mystery, and for now, It was enough just to be a part of it, breathing in the cool, star-dusted air. Chapter 6. The air grew thin and cool, a balm against the memory of the day's oppressive heat. Over Athens, the sky bled from the deep rose of a fading blush to a bruised, tender lilac, a color so soft it seemed less a pigment and more an exhalation. Along the high paths of the Acropolis, the great marble ways still held a phantom warmth, a ghost of the sun long departed, which they released into the evening in a slow, stony sigh. The olive branches, ancient and gnarled, traced their shifting, delicate patterns against this darkening canvas, their leaves 1,000 tiny hands gesturing in the hesitant breeze. Lyra and her teacher Theon moved through this transition as if they were a part of it. Their steps were soft, their sandals brushing the fine, pale dust that coated everything, a powder of crushed time. Each footfall was measured, almost silent, a conscious slowing to match the world's own descent into quietude. The frantic, shimmering song of the cicadas, that relentless pulse of the Attic summer, had begun to ebb. It gave way to a deeper, more resonant frequency, the distant, murmurous hum of the city below, drawing its shutters, lighting its lamps, closing in upon itself for the night. They came to a place Theon favored, a small, unvisited terrace away from the grander vistas. Here, a single marble bench, worn smooth by centuries of quiet contemplation, rested in the deep shadow of a spreading olive tree. The tree was a patriarch, its trunk a twisted column of silver-grey wood, its leaves already trembling with the first touch of true moonlight that was yet to crest the eastern hills. The air in this small pocket of the world was heavy with fragrance. Wild thyme, crushed somewhere unseen in the encroaching dark, released its sharp, clean scent, a note of wildness against the lingering, almost decadent sweetness of heliotrope that clung to the cooling stone walls. Lyra hesitated for a moment before the bench, her hands clasped loosely before her. The day's lessons, of logic, of rhetoric, of the endlessly debatable nature of virtue, still churned within her, a sea of unspoken thoughts and half-formed questions. She felt a familiar, youthful urgency to grasp it all, to weave the disparate threads into a single, perfect tapestry of understanding. Theon, however, simply drew a slow, deep, contented breath. He did not speak, but the sound of his inhalation was an invitation in itself, an invitation to release the day, to let the silence settle not as an absence, but as a presence. He sat, his movements fluid and unhurried, his weight settling onto the cool stone with the gentle finality of a falling leaf. He patted the space beside him, and Lyra, letting go of the breath she hadn't realized she was holding, joined him. The marble was cool against her skin, a shock that was not unpleasant, leaching the last of the day's warmth and weariness from her bones. For a long time, they simply sat. They watched as the lilac sky deepened to indigo, and the first shy stars pricked through the velvet. Theon's stillness was a lesson in itself. He was not waiting for something to happen. He was experiencing what was already there. The faint shiver of an olive leaf, the distant bark of a dog from the warren of streets below, the slow, majestic wheel of the heavens. When he finally spoke, his voice was pitched just above the sound of the night, a low and gentle texture in the quiet air. "Lyra," he began, his gaze fixed not on her, but on the vastness before them. As you look upon the world tonight, as you feel it settle around you, what do you find changes in you, simply by noticing? The question was not a test. It was a key, offered to unlock a door she hadn't known was there. Lyra did not search for a clever answer, for a quote from the masters or a principle of philosophy. Instead, she followed his lead. She listened, she felt, she noticed. She felt the hum of the night, not as a collection of individual sounds, but as a single breathing entity. She felt the cool solidity of the marble beneath her, a tether to the earth, and the immense airy emptiness of the sky above, a call to the infinite. She felt the quiet bond that existed between herself and the old man beside her, a connection that needed no words to sustain it. The silence, she said, her own voice softer than she intended, as if not to disturb the very thing she was describing. It feels shared, not empty. When the sun is high, every man's voice is his own, shouting to be heard. But now, it feels as though we are all listening to the same quiet song. She paused, watching a moth flutter erratically in the deepening gloom. And the light is different. During the day, the sun exposes everything, shows every flaw. But this light, the gloaming, it feels kinder, as if every living thing, the leaves on that tree, that small flower in the crack of the stone, is lit from within. Theon nodded slowly, a deep and resonant sound from his chest. Lit from within, he repeated, savouring the phrase as one might savour old wine. A lovely thought. Their conversation, when it continued, did not march forward in a straight line, but moved in slow, meandering eddies, like smoke in still air. Theon spoke of a dawn he had witnessed as a boy, of the way the mist had risen from the sea in great silent columns, and how for a moment he had believed the pillars of the gods were walking upon the water. Lyra, emboldened, shared a memory of her own, the singular, earthy scent of the first rain on the sun-baked dust of the courtyard after a long drought, a smell so potent it felt like the parched earth itself was sighing in relief. They spoke of the wisdom found not in grand pronouncements, but in patient watchfulness. The way an ant colony builds its empire grain by grain, the slow, inexorable journey of a vine up a wall, the certainty of the tides. Lyra felt the tight knot of intellectual ambition within her begin to loosen. She stopped searching for the grand, overarching truths, the definitive answers she so craved. She let the beauty and the quiet imperfection of her own thoughts rest in the space between them, unjudged and unhurried. Theon smiled, a faint curving of his lips visible in the gloom. He gestured with one long finger toward the base of the olive tree, where its shadow lay like a pool of ink upon the ground. "You see, Lyra," he said softly, "we spend our days seeking answers, as if they were treasures to be unearthed and possessed. But the night teaches us a different truth. Not all questions are for answering. Some are for carrying, some are for living with. They are not burdens, but companions. Like a lamp we carry in the dark, their purpose is not to illuminate the entire world at once, but only the next few steps of our path." As he finished speaking, the moon, full and impossibly bright, finally cleared the marble shoulder of the Parthenon. The world was transformed. The garden, which had been a place of soft shadows and muted tones, was suddenly painted in a stark and breathtaking palette of silver and black. Every olive leaf, a small blade of darkness on one side, flashed with a wet, silvered gleam on the other. The marble of their bench seemed to glow, and the tiny pale flowers of the thyme at their feet were like scattered chips of pearl. The distant columns of the temple complex were rendered in ethereal light, their fluting carved by sharp dark shadows. The sky was no longer black, but a deep, luminous indigo, and the stars, which had been singular points of light, now trembled in a vast, glittering sea. A profound stillness descended, deeper than any that had come before. It was the stillness of absolute awe. Lyra's gaze lingered on the silent, impossible beauty of the scene. The need for words, for questions, for answers, evaporated completely. There was only this, the cool air on her skin, the ancient stone beneath her, the silent, silvered world laid out before her. In her heart, a feeling she could not name began to bloom, a slow, glowing contentment, warm and deep. It was the peace of knowing, with a certainty that went beyond logic, that to simply be here, to witness, to wonder, was enough. It was more than enough. As the night deepened and the moon climbed higher, teacher and student sat without speaking, their hearts unhurried, their minds quiet. They were two small, still figures in a vast and sacred landscape, attentive only to the gentle lullaby of the waking night. The world, in all its broad and luminous mystery, felt intimately close, as if they could reach out and touch the fabric of the stars. And so, under the quiet stars, they found their peace. May you find yours as well. Good night. What quiet question or simple moment has brought you pause today? We'd love to hear how you too carry gentle wonder through the twilight.